Quick heads up, this is actually a sequel video, so if you're interested in watching from the start, a link will be up in the top right. So, following up on murders, we have quite an interesting direction. Welcome to Space Station Level 7, viewers. This is the often overlooked 5th stop on our journey through Hawaii Part 2. As you are likely aware, this song is mostly in a foreign language, so it can be a little hard to distill what it's trying to say most of the time. I intend to fix that, giving Space Station the respect that it's due. First and foremost, the name. Why is this song called Space Station Level 7? Well, my first thought would be the Bible, seeing as they mention heaven a lot throughout the song. You've probably heard the idea that 7 is a lucky number, with 777 being incredibly lucky. This part comes from the Bible, where Jesus is represented by the number 7. The other part of the title, Space Station, is not as biblically oriented. A space station is in space, obviously. Even though space is all around us, it's fairly common for humans to think that space is above us. Do you know what else is thought to be above us? Heaven. Another important part of this title is the fact that space stations are man-made. So, we have Jesus' number associated with a man-made device in space. Putting all that together, I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that the heaven described in this song is fake. That's the first issue squared away, and next issue, the language. I speak neither French nor Japanese, so if I get some things wrong, I am only utilizing the most accurate tools I have at my disposal. Elaborating on this, I'm not using the Genius translation, I'm using the Hidden in the Sand translation. Why is this? Well, I've checked with some other sources, and it seems like Hidden in the Sand has a better translation of the kanji. You may have seen the line "Heaven's full of lies" passed around, which is not based in the song. As such, these lyrical translations have spread some misinformation that I want to counter. I will link Hidden in the Sand's translation down below. I do not know how Genius's lyric system works, but if you are able to change it, I highly recommend fixing it to the Hidden in the Sand version. I think I've packed away everything that needs covering, so let's move on to the lyrics. Right off the bat, we've got a tricky one. This line implies that there was some kind of time skip in play. 15 years is a very specific duration of time, so it would be a little weird if it wasn't relevant to the story in some overarching way. Where would this stretch of time fit, though? I'll go over some of the most common examples and talk about how much I think they fit within the story we have. The most obvious idea is that this is the gap of time between the end of Murders and the beginning of the Mind Electric, and there are two different theories that people often argue for if they believe that that's the case. Theory 1 is that Simon has been hiding from the police for 15 years. While this is the most obvious conclusion of them all, I don't really think it's the best one. The most damning piece of evidence is that Simon seems incredibly remorseful from the end of Murders until the rest of the album. And if he was regretful, he would likely turn himself in, not hide from the cops for 15 years. I think this one's a bust. The other idea for the Murders Mind Electric time gap is that Simon has been held in prison for 15 years. While this idea fits with Simon's character a lot better, this event would involve scrambling the timeline more than it probably should. The Mind Electric is where Simon gets tried in court, so the court system would have to be ridiculously slow for this to be the case. This song could move in the timeline after the Mind Electric, but I don't think that works either. Simon is in a very scared and uneasy mental state after that song, which is not replicated here. His personality here is more aligned with Dream Suite in C major rather than the Mind Electric, Labyrinth, Time Machine, and Stranded Lullaby. This idea is also a bust, in my opinion. The final common theory is that this is the gap of time between White Ball and Murders. This one moves us in the right direction, but I don't think it exactly fits with what we know about Simon so far. My main gripe with this theory is that we see Simon acting weird in White Ball, not just in Murders. Why would he revert to something more aggressive after 15 years? It just seems like an odd choice. I think this theory is also a bust. Throwing away all the common interpretations is a bold move to say the least. I have a reason for it though. I think there is a stretch of time that has been overlooked and feeds into the whole meaning of the album. What if the stretch of time is between Pearl Harbor and the end of Murders? I discussed the creation of Apollo in White Ball, about him being a symptom of PTSD-triggered psychosis from the Pearl Harbor attacks. I will admit, I did not elaborate on the evidence for that as much as I should have, so I'm going to make up for it now. Let's start with Simon's career. In the final song of the album, Dream Suite in C major, the name is obviously supposed to sound like C major, the instrumental scale. Notice though how it's spelled C major and not C major. Immediately, the song jumps out to me as a reference to a naval funeral, specifically a burial at sea, which is what happens in Dream Suite in C major. Major is also a role in the military, so at the very least, Simon was a military man, but he was most likely in the Navy. Adding on to this, Simon's story is tied directly to the ocean and boats with songs like Stranded Lullaby. Simon being a naval man makes thematic sense. We also have the album's name, Hawaii Part 2. Combined with the radio microphone and introduction to the snow, the sampling of old TV shows, and the black and white cartoon music video, I'd say this points us to a second return to Hawaii sometime in the past. Why Pearl Harbor though? I have two supporting bets for this. First, the album's length is precisely 41 minutes and 55 seconds. The vinyl is purposefully trimmed this way so that when you reach the halfway point of the Mind Electric, when it stops being reversed, you can flip it and it'll play normally. Coincidentally, Pearl Harbor occurred in 1941 at 8:55 a.m. Notice how 41 and 55 are shared across both sets of numbers. My second piece of evidence is that aside from English, Japanese is the most prominent language here. Japanese is just all over this album, and there isn't a clear reason as to why unless you really analyze it through the lens of Pearl Harbor. Combining all of these elements together, we have a sailor returning to Hawaii roughly 15 years after the events of Pearl Harbor. Why 15 years in specific? Well, I have two reasons, one of which I can't get into right now, but the other is pretty straightforward. Apollo has been waiting 15 years for this moment because Simon wasn't reaffected with Apollo until Island to Thyself. Everything understood? Good. Let's move into the second line of the song. It's gonna be one of those songs, isn't it?
それは大地を残すことは無理我々は天国から出発
So, we've put together the time skip. Let's piece together another important element. Who's singing? We're looking at the lines. There are three languages here: Japanese, French, and English. Japanese and French are sung with a male voice, and English is sung by a female choir. We can pretty easily conclude that the singing choir is Betty, or at least a representation of her. What about the other two though? Going off the idea that Apollo likely stems from trauma related to Pearl Harbor, I think it makes the most sense that he's the Japanese voice. This leaves Simon for French, and while it may seem random, I have a pretty decent explanation as to why. French is culturally known as the language of love, and we know that Simon is the one that's currently struggling with his relationship. Thus, we have our roles. Let's actually cover the lines. To start, we have Apollo talking about how Simon can't leave the Earth behind. Think back to the beginning of White Ball, where Simon was drifting aloft and bound by delicate dread. This likely relates back to that, where he cannot depart from the world he currently resides because he's anchored there by Betty. This is probably the other reason that she's the English choir. Simon and Betty speak English on Earth, so she's the thing bounding him down still. Line 2 then has them departing from heaven. The use of we here is in referral to Simon and Apollo, not Simon and Betty. Just thought I would make that clear.
それは秘密じゃないすぐに誰もが知っている
These two lines are very straightforward in my opinion. There's a bit of a trend with the rest of the song where the Japanese voice is hyping up something. We see it over and over again, and I think this is Apollo trying to goad Simon into actually letting go of Betty. In this case, it's Apollo taunting Simon about how everyone will find out he murdered her. These two lines in particular are why I think the song has to take place soon after murders. Probably taking place after the end of murders and before the police find Simon. In other words, this is a threat. I believe the chorus here builds on Apollo trying to goad Simon into entering heaven. This is the only point where the female choir is used, and it seems like another tactic to convince Simon to let go. Think about it. If the only thing holding Simon to Earth still is Betty, then wouldn't a choir of her voice in heaven be convincing? It's as if her voice isn't real, a siren trying to lure him into a trap. The other two Japanese lines back this up as well. Line 2 is a little mixed, either calling it the celestial country or the kingdom of heaven, which both, I think, roughly mean the same thing, basically trying to show off the grandiose and perfect nature of heaven. Line 4, heaven is on standby, also backs this up, saying that heaven is waiting for Simon. If you're wondering why I think this is the case, recall back to murders. Apollo represents the Earl King, somebody who tries to lure people to their death, and I think this is the case here as well. Apollo wants Simon to drop all connections to Earth, probably including his physical body as well. Okay, I'm gonna stop there, we'll wrap back around to that point later. Anyways, line 4 is just basically a rewriting of Heaven is Waiting.
宇宙ステーションだもう何もこれに比較しませんレベル7に橋のしおし
Line 1, I'm gonna wrap back around to it again, sorry, but this is another thing I need to square away for a little later. Trust me, it's gonna all make sense when I unload it there. I will say though, Apollo wants Simon to climb inside some kind of ship that's landed on Earth. Pin that thought in your mind's corkboard. Line 2, pretty simple, it's more persuasion tactics. Specifically, Apollo is trying to say that heaven is more outstanding than anything on Earth. Okay, something a little more interesting with line 3 here. We have a ladder to level 7. We know from the title that level 7 is a pretty explicit reference to Jesus Christ. If you don't know, Jesus Christ is a manifestation of God in a human form. This is Apollo telling Simon to climb up a ladder and meet God. Hey wait, a ladder? Why not some kind of staircase? Well, it's not a ladder per se, it's more just something that helps you get up. Why do I say this? Well, it's a reference to Jacob's ladder, the stairway to heaven. Looking through some images, the two most common interpretations I've seen is that of a literal ladder or a spiral staircase. Hey look, another representation on the album cover. Notice how the stairs on the album cover are spiraling upwards and aren't a straight staircase up. Did not mention it in Murders for whatever reason, but the album cover features a monster on it, which is likely representing that song. So yeah, the staircase represents Space Station Level 7. Hey, why are there children in this song now? That's a bit of an odd thing to mention. You know, there have been a lot of weird things sprung on us. First, the very specific 15-year time skip, the ship landing on Earth, sleeping children. What's going on here? Well, what if I said that this was a direct reference to a real-world cult? A very infamous and dangerous one. Heaven's Gate was a doomsday cult that believed its followers would be taken away to heaven in a ship as the rapture occurred on Earth. Personally, I would describe their beliefs as mixing sci-fi and Christianity together. The first comparison we see is the 15-year time skip. Followers of Heaven's Gate believed that the Earth would be recycled in the year 2027. How does 15 years relate to this? Recall when the album was released. December 12th, 2012 at 12:12 a.m. So the number 12 is very important to this album. Very, very important. That was just 9 days before people thought the world was going to end. If you add 15 years to 2012, you get 2027, the year that Heaven's Gate believed the Earth was going to be recycled. Waiting time has ended, and the ship has arrived. Speaking of the Salvation ship, this is almost definitely the repeatedly mentioned Heavenly Space Station. Apollo is telling Simon to board the ship and to be taken to heaven. In essence, Apollo wants to take Simon onto the ship before the rapture. The final weird thing for this song is the sleeping children. Well, the followers of Heaven's Gate were often referred to as the children of the next level. Wait, next level? Even the title of the song is in reference to Heaven's Gate. Well, we know about why children are mentioned, but why are they sleeping? Sleeping is a very common metaphor for being dead, and if there's one thing that Heaven's Gate is unfortunately known for, it's the Hale-Bopp comet incident. The comet passing near the Earth caused their leader to take it as a sign to act, convincing their members to simultaneously commit suicide. Why is this here? Why is this in Space Station Level 7? Well, I think it has to do with the cultural role of Heaven's Gate. It is, in essence, viewed as a death cult, a group of extremists ending people's lives for a religious end. The victims of Heaven's Gate were sacrificed. They didn't have to die. While Simon isn't a member of a cult, His story is like that of a religious cultist sacrificing a loved one. He heard voices of the truth in his head, which told him to kill the only person he loved, and in the end, he got nothing. The purpose is to highlight Simon's twisted thought process. It is a thematic parallel. I should give proper credit to this initial idea. I didn't specifically come up with the Heaven's Gate connection, I found this through somebody on Reddit. So big thanks to you/Ultimate Satyr Exter. I hope I'm saying that right. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but your cross-analysis of Space Station Level 7 and Heaven's Gate really enlightened me, and I think it's the most accurate interpretation of the song. So, we know the context behind these lines, but why are they here, specifically? It seems to me that Apollo is speaking about the other people that he lured to heaven, the other victims of the Earl King. I refer to Apollo in a more broad context here. He isn't the specific Apollo that whispers things to Simon, he's the voice in your head that tells you to do horrible things. Let's move away from the Japanese part and into the French.
La galaxie s'étend, jardin de l'imagination.
We move into Simon's section of the song now. We can tell because of the French being sung. As explained in the last section, the children are victims of Apollo. Before we can understand a group of children, we need to understand the galaxy extends. Let's go all the way back to Black Rainbows, when I overproduced my mic and made it sound a little blown out. Remember what Betty represents in this album? If you don't remember, she is the Stella Octangula, or the star. If all of these children are stars, then couldn't a group of them be considered a galaxy? With her death, Betty has now become a part of the night sky as the galaxy extends. The final line of this section cements for me that Simon has finally understood his delusions are delusions. Using the word garden invokes biblical imagery with the Garden of Eden, which could be another callback to heaven. So, Simon is now aware that this garden is imaginary. He just had to do it after everything went wrong. Kinda unfortunate in my opinion.
Je dois vivre mon soir, lance-toi et tout vivre toujours.
The final section of this song. Based on what I've gone through, it seems pretty clear. Simon is returning to Earth, leaving the fake manifestation of heaven behind. He then tells Betty that she will live forever as a star in the sky. This is also the first use, I think chronologically, of You'll Live Forever Tonight. It's reutilized in Introduction to the Snow and Dream Suite in C major, and it symbolizes the memory of Betty living on. As he returns back to reality, Apollo calls out one last time to join him in heaven, but his voice fades away. This is the only song that actually has a fade effect at the end, which is why I think this is the case. He's moving away from heaven. It's hard to say what happens next exactly, but we do know that Simon is arrested and taken into custody. We see the trial and aftermath in The Mind Electric, which is our next song, so stay tuned for that. I believe that covers everything regarding Space Station Level 7. If you liked my coverage of the song, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. My goal is to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, which I know is a lofty goal, but we're already 1/5 of the way there. Oh, speaking of that, thank you so much for 2,000 subscribers, it means a lot to me. I would appreciate everyone's support a whole lot. Thank you to my members, Some Ness, ItsJoeYo, and DawnTheSylv. Your support helps me produce videos that keep me going. Next time, I will cover the most anticipated song of them all, The Mind Electric.